Last night, our Shelby Myers took you to New Orleans for our ongoing series, The Gulf Coast Connection to the JFK assassination, including the suspicion that fell on a key figure, David Ferrie.
Well, tonight, investigative reporter Brendan Kirby taking a closer look at the former pilot and anti-communist activist through the eyes of a Fairhope man whose father knew him.
Fairhope resident James Waters grew up hearing stories of his father's career as a commercial airline pilot. James Waters Sr. was a naval aviator before switching to civilian work, but there's one story the younger Waters didn't hear until decades later.
He was always very closed-mouthed about a lot of this stuff.
What Waters was reluctant to talk about, and what his son hasn't discussed publicly until now, is a tale of David Ferrie, Lee Harvey Oswald, and their possible connection to the murder of a president. John F. Kennedy died 56 years ago this week in Dallas. The official conclusion was that Oswald committed the murder and acted alone. But suspicions have followed Ferrie, an airline captain and colleague of Waters' father at Eastern Airlines in the early 1960s. Waters says his father was stunned immediately after Kennedy's death when he saw Oswald's photograph plastered on the news.
When he realized what it was, he was like, oh my God, I met that guy at Dave Ferrie's.
Waters says that at the time, his father was a co-pilot, and co-pilots tended to follow the lead of the captains, even outside of the cockpit. For Waters' father, that meant attending parties. At one gathering at Ferrie's New Orleans home within a year of the assassination, Oswald stood out.
He didn't look like the rest of the crew in the party, you know? Everybody else was, like I said, 1960s, airline pilots, a little bit of cash, flush, and, partying there with either wives, girlfriends, or whatever. And that Oswald just kind of was kind of a lump on the wall and didn't really seem to fit in.
That lump on the wall, of course, would go on to become one of the most infamous assassins in history. But doubts about whether Oswald acted alone, or at all, emerged within just a few years of the Warren Commission's official findings.
So you got anything new on the investigation?
Who are you scared of, Dave?
Me?
New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison suspected Ferrie, portrayed by actor Joe Pesci in the 1991 Oliver Stone film about the case.
David Ferrie is one of those, what we call, liminal figure.
But University of New Orleans history professor John Fitzmaurice III dismisses the idea of a conspiracy involving Ferrie and the man Garrison put on trial, businessman Clay Shaw.
He sort of walks between the legal and illegal side of New Orleans life here. I think that he was caught in yet another legal situation and that he seized upon an opportunity to implicate Shaw and Oswald.
Ferrie was an instructor in the Civil Air Patrol and in the 1960s worked with an anti-communist organization. Questioned by the FBI 5 days after the assassination, Ferrie denied knowing Oswald. Waters' father is not the only person to say Ferrie and Oswald knew each other, however. This photograph, that first surfaced in 2003, shows them together in the Civil Air Patrol in the 1950s. Author Gerald Posner, a lawyer and investigative journalist who spent years researching the assassination, concluded in his 1993 book Case Closed that Kennedy's death was not the result of a conspiracy.
There are all types of stories about Oswald Ferrie in '63, none of which in the end I find credible, although I think some of the people believe them. I just don't find anything that absolutely ties the two together. And even if it did, the question then is, what does it have to do with the assassination?
But Waters says 2 or 3 of the pilots his father worked with ended up dying mysteriously or committed to a mental institution. He says his father's proximity to Ferrie unnerved him as he continued his career far from New Orleans.
I'd ask him about the JFK stuff, and he was very, very silent about it and almost scared to talk about it. My dad didn't fear much, but you bring that topic up and you could tell that it was very unsettling.
The deaths that Waters references have been added by some to a long list of mysterious demises that conspiracy theorists have pointed to. Tune in tomorrow night as Shelby Myers brings you the last installment of our series, focusing on one of those deaths. Reporting from the studio, Brendan Kirby, Fox 10 News.